Peter Thiel confessed, quote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible," end quote. According to Google CEO and Bilderberg attendee Eric Schmidt, quote, "If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place," end quote. Likewise, Facebook chairman Mark Zuckerberg claims that privacy is no longer a social norm. Those rules apply only for the rest of us because they directly contradict Thiel's statements. Thiel is now the Bilderberg's most prominent member as part of their elite steering committee who decide on attendees. Explaining the group's need for privacy, Thiel explained, quote, "We need to find ways to talk to people where not everything is completely transparent. Libertarianism is not synonymous with radical transparency. That's often an argument the Stasi would make in East Germany, where everything had to be monitored by society. Whereas in small groups, or smaller groups, where not everything is being monitored, it's how you can have very honest conversations and how you can think better about the future," end quote. Thiel not only founded PayPal and the CIA-backed Palantir, but sits on Facebook's board. According to Newton Lee, author of Facebook Nation, platforms like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and YouTube are leading the way towards total information awareness, with the acronym TIA, a mass detection program by the United States Information Awareness Office established by DARPA in 2002. Based on the concept of predictive policing, TIA aimed to digitally collect detailed information about individuals in order to anticipate and prevent crimes before they were committed. TIA was the aim of the Information Awareness Office, IAO, established by DARPA in 2002. Eerily, the IAO's logo employed the Masonic pyramid and the all-seeing eye of the reverse side of the dollar bill, casting its vision over the globe. With Francis Bacon's Scientia est potentia, meaning knowledge itself is power, as a motto. Disturbingly, Zuckerberg recently recommended Henry Kissinger's World Order. Quote, "It's about foreign relations and how we can build peaceful relationships throughout the world. This is important for creating the world we all want for our children, and that's what I'm thinking about these days." End quote. Cybernetics, eugenics, Teilhard de Chardin's noosphere, interest in modern computing, psychedelics, and the occult have combined in a modern manifestation known as transhumanism. The creation of the personal computer were merely a milestone, a stepping stone to a grander ambition of replicating the human mind by creating a thinking machine. By achieving artificial intelligence, in fulfillment of Norbert Weiner's dream, would be to make man a god. Ultimately, man would create a thinking machine that would become omniscient, and by tapping into the totality of human knowledge through Google and Wikipedia, and through the use of the internet and various, quote, social networking applications like Facebook, Twitter, and so on, it would be possible to track the actions of every human on Earth, actualizing the Masonic all-seeing eye. Similar ideas were expressed by Timothy Leary. In 1990, Leary explained that his vision of God was depicted in the last scene in cyberpunk author William Gibson's book Neuromancer, articulating a vision that would mirror that of Teilhard de Chardin. According to Leary, quote, "At the end of the world, all the information stored in all the computers will rise up into cyberspace and mingle together," end quote. He said, quote, "That's God," end quote. In 1995, Jennifer Cobb Kreisberg declared in Wired, quote, "Teilhard saw the net coming more than half a century before it arrived," end quote. The so-called singularity, which is the equivalent of Chardin's omega point, according to transhumanists, will mark the moment when man will have evolved into a post-human existence through, quote, "mind uploading." Having achieved immortality by being merged with the internet, being likened to the New Age concept of a, quote, "collective consciousness" or global brain. Like MKUltra, the personal computer was a project of the Cybernetics group and designed to provide the ultimate tool of social control. Knowing that the rest of society would easily recognize the pervasive deployment of computers in every household as an intrusive of, quote, Big Brother. The hippie counterculture was aligned with the nascent technology of culture of California, to mark the computer instead as a tool of personal liberation. At the root of it was the idea of, quote, spiritual evolution, whereby networking every human individual on the planet and collecting into it the summation of human knowledge, the internet would be envisioned as the collective consciousness, the endpoint of millenarian expectations of the Kabbalah, where man becomes or creates God. It is the occult project of creating a golem, like Dr. Frankenstein producing life from inanimate matter. Underlying all of the efforts of the Cybernetics groups was the absurd belief that the human mind was a machine, and a Tower of Babel-like conviction that its functioning could be reverse engineered and eventually surpassed by computers. The pioneer in this project, known among its members as the, quote, Man-Machine Project, was John von Neumann, one of the Cybernetics group's leaders, and known for his work in mathematics and computer science. According to Jeffrey Steinberg from Cybernetics to Littleton, quote, the core of the Cybernetics group project was the development of computers and the prospect of combining high-speed computers with so-called artificial intelligence to literally, quote, program the human race. Underlying all of these efforts was the unshakable, albeit preposterous conviction, most avidly presented by von Neumann, that there was nothing sacred about the human mind, and that the human brain was a machine whose functioning could be replicated and eventually surpassed by computers. For the transhumanists, the internet is not just an agglomeration of inert information, but poses the possibility of humanity creating a collective consciousness of the mystics. Effectively, transhumanism is the hallucination arrived at by computer scientists on drugs. As psychedelic drugs impede the ability to discern reality from imagination, they often lead to the mistaken attribution of life, or even, quote, divinity, to inanimate objects like a computer program. The ultimate foolish dream of the transhumanists is that, with the creation of, quote, cyberspace, we'll be able to enter the pleroma, the mystical realm of the ancient Gnostics, by, quote, uploading our minds to the internet. Thus, the internet will have come to serve as a totality of human knowledge. The omniscient collective consciousness of Teilhard de Chardin, also known as the, quote, global brain. Like Chardin, Sri Aurobindo, who also exercised an important influence on SLN, described a progression from inanimate matter to a future state of divine consciousness, what de Chardin refers to as the omega point, what Aurobindo referred to as the supermind also. Ultimately, the vision for the internet was the mystical idea that dated back to William James, the American transcendentalist, world soul, and Maurice Buuck's, quote, cosmic consciousness. Similar ideas were also developed in 1912 by French philosopher Émile Durkheim, who argued in the elementary forms of religious life that society constitutes a higher intelligence because it transcends the individual over space and time. Other antecedents included H.G. Wells's concept of world brain. In World Brain, a collection of essays and addresses dating from the period of 1936 to 1938, Wells describes his vision of a new, free, synthetic, authoritative, permanent world encyclopedia that could help world citizens make the best use of universal information resources in order to contribute to world peace. In his 1962 book Profiles of the Future, Arthur C. Clarke, who was also inspired by Chardin, predicted that the construction of what H.G. Wells called the world brain would take place in two stages. Clarke identified the first of these as the construction of the World Library, or Wells's Universal Encyclopedia, accessible to everyone from their home on computer terminals by the year 2000. In the second stage, the World Library would be incorporated into the World Brain, a super-intelligent, artificially intelligent supercomputer that humans would be able to interact with to solve various world problems. He suggested that this supercomputer should be installed in the former war rooms of the US and the Soviet Union. Once the superpowers had matured enough to agree to cooperate rather than war with each other, Clarke predicted the construction of the world brain would be completed by the year 2100. Arthur C. Clarke, along with OTO member Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov, is considered one of the big three of science fiction. In the seminal short story of Isaac Asimov, quote, The Last Question, in the book Robot Dreams, humanity merges its collective consciousness with its own creation, an all-powerful cosmic computer. The resulting intelligence spends eternity working out whether, quote, the last question can be answered, namely, quote, can entropy ever be reversed? When the intelligence discovers that entropy can be reversed, it does so with the command, quote, let there be light. Canadian media theorist Marshall McLuhan, who was inspired by DIDN, is known for coining the expressions, quote, the medium is the message, and the, quote, global village, and for predicting the internet as a, quote, extension of consciousness. According to McLuhan, in the Gutenberg Galaxy, the making of typographic man, quote, the next medium, whatever it is, it may be the extension of consciousness, will include television as its content, not as its environment, and will transform television into an art form. A computer as a research and communication instrument could enhance retrieval, obsolescence, mass library organization, retrieve the individual's encyclopedic function and flip into a private line to speedily tailor data of a saleable kind. As Eric Davis remarked in Technosis, quote, some Christians, especially those with a brute Protestant conviction in the rock-solid inerrancy of the biblical word, would concur with Teilhard that our headlong flight towards planetization is part of a master plan, end quote. David was commenting on Marshall McLuhan's 1969 interview in Playboy, where McLuhan mentioned that computer networks hold out the promise of creating, quote, a technologically engendered state of universal understanding and unity, a state of absorption in the logos that could knit mankind into one family and create a perpetuity of collective harmony and peace, end quote. McLuhan clarified, quote, in a Christian sense, this is merely a new interpretation of the mystical body of Christ, and Christ, after all, is the ultimate extension of man, end quote. In a letter to a Cynicist, McLuhan flip-flopped on the idealism he had earlier expressed. Quote, electric information environments being utterly ethereal foster the illusion of the world as spiritual substance. It is not a reasonable facsimile of the mystical body of Christ, a blatant manifestation of the Antichrist. After all, the prince of this world is a very great electric engineer.